God, what am I doing? What am I doing here? Do you like vectors? This is not what I do. Hey, how you doing? My name is Poe Phoenix. I am a digital mercenary who specializes in vector portrait illustrations. For the last 2 years or so, I've been doing. I started to train myself in how to use Affinity Designer, which is a little different than Adobe Illustrator. And what I learned is that I had to completely shift my brain of how it worked. And once I adapted it, it became second nature for me to work on it, especially since I transitioned to an iPad. And in that time, I've learned a lot of techniques and tricks to make my portraits come to life and get to bring more life out of them in a very digital world, you know. And today, what I plan on doing is showing you some of my techniques that I use to make a stylized lighting set for your artwork. To give you a little tip, like a little idea of what goes through my brain while I'm doing my illustration. So it's a process video. I hope you get something out of it, and let's do it. So what I'm going for in this video is to really try to show to show my process when I am creating an illustration and how I perceive and conceptualize the lighting. All my illustrations are based off, for the most part, based off reference, but I don't use reference as an absolute when I'm choosing lighting. I decide that I pick and choose what is the most important part of lighting as I'm creating it, you know. And that's the thing when you're doing these illustrations and you're trying to figure out your lighting, like you try to find something that has a majority of the lighting that you want to use, and then kind of base your artwork off of that. So what I try to do is I study a lot of photographers and their lighting techniques of how they go about creating lighting, and then from there I start to parse out pieces that I can use in my work. So when I am like for this illustration, like she has a just high contrast. There's a high contrast look to this photo. At a certain point, what I do is I decide that what's more important to me is the illustration looking the best it possibly could, and not necessarily looking exactly like the photo, you know. So now, where I'm right now, I'm setting up the structure of the lighting and kind of setting down some of the groundwork. This is about breaking out some of the shadow work of from the photo. You know, when you block out, like I create my vectors the same way a lot of painters do. You know, I do a lot of blocking. I do a lot of I lay down a lot of flat colors so I know what I'm working with. Once I've blocked out all the colors for my illustrations, what I try to do is I use a lot of mask in my vector work. You know, there's mask on top of mask on top of mask, mask on mask on mask. And that helps me control where the color will fall and how the lighting is affected by it. You know, I use some gradients, but I don't use a lot. And this whole process is really based around getting the foundation right. You know, I try to focus on getting my structure of my painting, of my illustration down, meaning the layers and how they're going to fall on top of each other and how they're going to interact with each other as they lay. As I'm illustrating, which is really important in Affinity, is that you create groups as you're building out your layers, because if you don't, you're just gonna have 100 layers, and like halfway through your painting, you're gonna have all these layers of these little bitty vector pieces, and you're not gonna understand what is where. And double clicking does work to try to select things, but if you think and you start the process earlier in your your illustration, then you won't have to worry about it, and things organically start to organize themselves. Like I try to break my illustrations into groups of like light, shadow, and midtones. Like that's where I kind of live in a lot of my work. So my groups are set up similarly to that as well. Now I'm still working on the shadows because I'm working from. I think of it like this. So I have the subject. I get a base color for the subject, for her, and it was this medium brown. And then I try to go to one of the darkest colors, not the absolute darkest I'm gonna go, but I get like a really dark tone going so I can understand how the shadows are gonna fall, and then I can start to break out different lighting aspects to help accentuate the shadows and start to build out the form, because the light is what really creates the form in these type of pieces. It's not so much about the line work because there's very limited line work in this piece. So if that's the case, you have to kind of build the whole face strictly off of shapes and the lighting and how the different tones and saturations of the light will play into the piece. This is like it's important to try to figure things out, you know, while you're working on this. It's not, nothing is set in stone, and that's the thing I love about vector is that it's not set in stone, and you can always go back and make a change. Like every stroke is not a final, so even halfway through or near the end of the piece, you can decide that you can go back and make a change, and it'll keep the same fidelity that you've had since the beginning. You know, it's really helpful. And what I realize now is that the line work isn't dark enough to stand out the way I wanted to on these dark tones. So I had to shift the tone of that line work to make it a little darker to stand out more, to increase the contrast between the foreground. I mean the subject, the lighting, and her skin tones and the line work. Like I work within a hue saturation luminous panel, the HSL, while most people work in RGB or CMYK. I find it easier to control how much saturation and how bright or how dark my colors are, because it's they have sliders strictly for those settings, you know, and it just makes it easier to get the same effects. Now I'm trying to like, here is a little difficult because I'm still learning how to light the form, the body, and I'm still doing tests to figure out what works for me. And the idea is not to be perfect, but to be to create something that looks good. Like my goal is always to create the best looking illustration for the piece that I have, and that usually means that I am diverting from the actual illustration or reference. The reference is reference. It's just there like to help guide me if I need ideas to make the lighting shift, or for ideas of how the tones are supposed to be. But outside of that, in the end, I want to tell a story I'm trying to tell, so I will deviate from that and start to build out my own aspects. Like it's not going to be a one-to-one type of thing, because here, like, I'm feeling like the points were a little too tight, and I got to get this other shadow in on the shoulder, making sure that it doesn't overlap too much, checking to see what it looks like from a distance. Because when you're too close, sometimes you become too close and you can't see, you know, what's happening, even though it's right there. You gotta pull yourself and look at it from a different perspective in order to get a better idea of what's actually happening, you know. And that takes time to realize stuff like that, you know. So now this is when it gets tough. Like I need to start to add the lighting, the harsher lighting to the face, And you can make a lot of mistakes here, because if you make it too bright, then it doesn't align with the face. The tones of the face have to be similar, and if you make it too dark, then it's not bright enough to create enough contrast to make it simulate the idea of light hitting this particular space on the forehead or on your piece. So it's always like this push and pull of what is the best balance when it comes to these things. And to be honest, I'm still trying to figure it out. You know, like I've been doing this for this vector style for a few years now, and there's still things I'm learning about how the lighting is supposed to look. You know, if you look at my work over the last year or so, you'll see how it changed and it evolves over time, because I'm still learning. You know, and we all should be still learning as creatives. You know, like you don't end. Like there's no moment where you end being a creative. Like you should always be learning something new, figuring out new ways to evolve your style, seeking out new techniques, like to boldly go where no artist has gone before. You know, yeah. I'm a Star Trek nerd. So now it's getting that right lighting, and it's this part. Like I always have trouble getting this right, because I see it in the illustration, I see it in the reference a certain way, but it's not feeling right when I'm looking at it, and I have to constantly make these little adjustments to try to get it to feel more natural, you know. And that's my goal, is to try to get vector art, which is digital, which is in its essence a very unnatural medium. I'm trying to give it life, to make it feel organic and make it feel like it exists in this world in some way. And at times it can be difficult, because there are a lot of sharp edges in my work. You know, there are a lot of angles and there's few curves, you know, but the goal is always to try to make you, when you look at it and you see it, to feel like this is a being, this is a subject I want to learn more about, and I learn more about it by staring into this artwork. You know, and every angle and every line that I place is another way to tell a story within the piece. The lighting is about like shining light on her face and on her story. So how can I do that in a realistic way? You know, I try to build it up with these various these various levels of saturation. And as you see, when I change the colors, it's not something I pick one basic one that I pull from an image, or I have like a base skin tone that I want to use in my head, and I create that, and then I just iterate on that, going up or down the light scale, the luminous scale, to find the tones to work. Because what I learned is that you have to try to maintain the saturation levels throughout a photo, throughout the lighting like this, because when you start to go too far outside of the range, it starts to make the lighting seem unnatural, you know. And for my work, it's important for the lighting to feel, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I want it to feel natural. I want it to feel believable. And that's different than being realistic. Being believable and being realistic is two totally different things. Because there is, in realism, there's set rules for everything. But believable that's just trying to convince the audience that this is something that can be seen. Yeah, believable is a feeling more than anything else, and you and I both want you want the audience to feel something from your work, and that's more important to me than making sure the light aspect ratio is correct or whatever that means. I don't even think that's a real thing, but that's what's important to me, you know. So when I'm adding this next level of lighting, I'm kind of building up from dark to light, which is another painting technique that I try to use. It's still, I find it difficult at times because I'm trying to create like a staggered effect, so like it's steps. It's almost like a gradient going across from one tone to the next, but I don't do it in the same way that it's been done in the past. Not that I'm like some type of revolutionary artist or anything, but I've seen other people do it where it's like this like a gradient, like a band of color, you know. It goes dark, light, middle. Like I try not to do that. Like, so sometimes the light color will overlap the dark color, and the mid-tones will overlap the light colors. Like, I try to bounce it back and forth to try to get the effect of this believable lighting effect in an unnatural place, you know. And one of the tricks to getting people to start to believe in your lighting is having these small places where light hits, like underneath the eyes. Like, I try to add lighting there, not line work, but lighting, because it makes it more believable, you know. And I pull lighter colors than the actual highlights, and then build on top of it to try to keep that, like, that painting texture, like building up my colors, you know. I try to use that type of idea when I'm making these illustrations. Like, I want to build it up from where it was, and not just have these harsh breakpoints, you know. And it works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't, you know. I just keep trying. I keep practicing. I keep pushing. I keep trying to see if I can find that balance that'll work for the subject that I'm using, you know. And there's no set formula for it, you know. I try to do something a little different every time to challenge myself, so that the work can keep improving. It's like I do whatever I have to do to make sure that the artwork is good, to make sure it's great, you know. Again, not chasing perfection, because perfection's a lie, but I want to make sure my work is good, and people see it and they get excited about it, or they feel inspired to do it. You know, when I used to do Photoshop and I was looking at other people's work, my goal was always to try to create a piece of work that people couldn't figure out how it was created. And I still kind of carry that mentality with me when I do the work I do now, you know. Like, I use a ton of masks, which I stated before. Like, I try to because the masks help control the work, the lighting, in ways that the breaking, like drawing straight lines don't. Like, yeah, I can create a polygon of the shadow above the eye, you know, but it would have to be precise, because I want it to align with another color that's below it. So then it has to be masked so that it can cut at the edge of the other color. And you can get that effect manually, but it's a lot easier to do it this way. So I want the lighting to pop a little bit, and this is when I start to get to more of a overall lighting effect, and adding what is the term I'm trying to think of? An atmospheric light, you know, ambient. There it is. This is the point where I want to add like an ambient light. And the thing about ambient lights is that it doesn't really, they're subtle, you know, and that's the other stage, is like starting to work into the subtleties of lighting. you know. And when you start to look at photos and look at how photographers light things, you can start to learn that there are shadows within shadows, and then there's light on top of light, and it's all like this real subtle. They make subtle changes, you know, and we don't even notice it because we're just so caught up in the subject matter and what the subject is telling us. But when you start to dig deeper, you see that there's all these subtle enhancements in lighting and where it hits and pops, and you got to take note of that, because those little things are what intrigue the viewer to stay with your piece a little longer. You know, when they see like there's like a little light in the corner of someone's eye and you wonder why that's there, it's there for a reason. It's almost like Easter eggs. It's like when you watch a movie and you go back later on, you listen to the director's cut and they tell you they put like blue shoes on all the characters because that was important, because when they was 13 they wanted to have blue shoes, they never had it, and now they got blue shoes. I don't know, that doesn't make sense, but that's the thing. You want to add these little small details to it to kind of to allow the viewer to look deeper into what you're doing, you know. And the more you can do that, the more interesting your piece gets. And that's definitely something that I've been trying to lean into with the lighting, and going further into adding more little details to my pieces to add more appeal to them, and more excitement in things that I'm creating, you know, because it's all about the story that you're trying to tell with these pieces. So the techniques are great, but if the story's not coming across, then it's also a matter that there's something missing, and you have to think about it and go back. And I'm using this lighting now to kind of frame out her face so it pops a little more off the background. But I also use this very loose coloring style where I don't stay in the lines, and so it's a couple different techniques I'm using at play right now that kind of balance against each other to create this effect, you know. And sometimes it works, you know. You got to kind of try and test and experiment is my favorite thing to say. Like I'm always experimenting with different ideas and techniques when it comes to the way things can be created, the styles I use. Like this very hard edge style is something I've been working on for the last couple years, and now I'm trying to get this lighting, and I'm not 100% happy with this lighting. Like I think it may be too hard, and it works on the edge, but it doesn't really work on the face for me. But I haven't. I'm gonna leave it for now and see if see how I feel later on, because sometimes it changes. Like as you work through the piece and you get deeper into it, something that you thought didn't work starts to work once it's part of a whole and not really on its own anymore. So you gotta have patience with your artwork as well as with yourself, you know. But all that it takes time from doing a lot of work. Like when you first start out, you're not gonna recognize that you need to give your pieces space. You gotta give it time. You gotta give time away from it as well to get fresh eyes on it. Like what I was speaking about earlier. It's like when you're too close to it, you've been working on something for like 4 hours, you know, 5 hours straight, and everything is gonna look a certain way because you've been seeing it for a long time, back to back to back to back to back. And when you walk away, like you get a good night's sleep, you go watch a movie, you go hang out with your friends, you know, you go do something that has nothing to do with the artwork. It detaches you from your own biases that you create as you do the illustration. So when you come back the next day or 2 days or a week or whatever it is, when you come back with fresh eyes. Like it's all the biases that you've created are gone now, and now you can see it more honestly, and you can see that now. Oh, that may not work, or oh, I made this head way too big, or maybe her eyes aren't the right shape and they're a little off center now, and I can fix it because I can see it now, because before you were trying to just create, you were in a mode of creation. But that space is definitely needed for work. Like, this is one of the subtleties I was describing. Like, this little bit of light that I'm going to put on the nose helps add depth to the piece, and it's not something that's really super offset, but it's just a little bit darker, you know, than the color behind it, so that it stands out, but it won't be completely over the top. While this is brighter in the photo, I didn't want it that bright, you know. And now I'm trying to balance that light I put on the nose by darkening the nostril below the nose, and those two tones play together and make them both pop, but won't be overbearing for the entire piece. You know, these are the type of push and pulls that you have to think about when you're working your illustrations. Is that there's never, you gotta try, you gotta do different things. You can't just like stick to the thing that you know all the time. Like, because every piece is different. It's like every person you ever meet, they can come up from the same neighborhood, go to the same schools, hang out with the same people, but end up being totally different people because they absorb information differently. And that's the same thing with artwork. Like, you have the same skills and the knowledge and experiences, but each painting and each illustration is different. You know, they're trying to achieve something different, and you have to give it that space to be flexible enough to try to like allow yourself to do something different for this particular piece, you know. Now I realize I've been waxing poetically, but I need to fill out these lips, you know, before time runs out. Oh, I did that. I need to fill out these lips. So the base layer is the darkest. Like, there's a lot of dark colors in the lips themselves, because so the lips, since they are pressed together, they create what's called an inclusion shadow, and that is usually a darker shadow than, that's one of the darkest darks in your illustration. So you have to think about that. So I'm trying to think about that now and get that together, and I'm always trying to get this lighting on lips to be correct, and I have not been able to achieve it exactly how I want, because there's always like this line right above the lip that creates like this outline, and I have not mastered that technique yet. Like this, no matter, for the most part, it's like always like the lips are one color, and then you got this little outline around it at the top, and I haven't gotten it to be as believable as I want it to be. It gets the job done, but it's not where I want it to be, and I gotta keep practicing that. Like, now I'm trying to the same way I built out the face with lights and shapes. This is the same way I'm doing right now with the lips. You know, I'm using a medium tone to kind of shape out some of the form where the light is going to go, and it's creating a break from the dark shadows that are behind it to the right. And as I work through this, trying to figure out the best way to make this work. Like, bringing that shadow down helps connect all the lights, like all the dark shadows, with the medium, so the medium shadow can, the medium tone can sit on top of it. But now it's the part of bringing in the lights where it's going to get spicy, you know, because the same thing as before. Like I want to make sure that the light is effective, but not overbearing. Because if I make it too bright, it's going to dominate the piece. You know, your eyes are gonna go right there first. You know, and that's the thing about lighting. You know, it's balancing the lights and the darks, which is a very basic thing to say, but it's true. Like understanding how the lights and the darks work within your piece. You know, you're telling people where to look by dictating how the light appears in the piece. So if I want you to focus on her face and bring too much attention to her chest or her shoulders, you know, I have to make sure that the most dominant part of the illustration, light-wise, is the part where I want you to focus the most. And I want you to focus the most on around her eyes and her face. And eyes and her nose, not so much her lips. The lips was secondary. I need to make it the second most important point of interest. You know? This is getting good, and it's almost at a point where I'm happy with it. I think this triangle is too dominating. It's bringing too much attention, so I need to bring it down. And I start to use gradients to kind of simulate the subtleties in the shadows to balance it out a bit. Sometimes I may use a blurred box as well. And now I'm trying to add a gradient into this and darken the back half of the piece so that it fades into this darkness, because I kind of want it to be like a part silhouette, and like the light is just filling in most of her face and some of her shoulder. And if that's the case, I have to make some adjustments to the positioning, adjust the lighting a little bit, tweak it, tighten that. You know, here I'm still looking at the piece for reference, because it's still kind of my reference, but I'm also kind of starting to deviate away from it. And I'm getting close to wrapping this up. You know, I merged that because the line one piece of the graphic was not blending as well, and I wanted it to blend from because it's one big shadow, so I wanted it to blend a little better. And I see that another piece needs to be blended, and I forgot to. You know, again, this is all like, it's an experiment. This whole thing, to me, every illustration is just an experiment. These lights are kind of bothering me. I still don't think I think this is too bright. And the lips need more attention. They need more effects, because I wanted to kind of simulate more of what's being seen there, but that highlight is too bright, so I brought down the saturation some so that it could be its own color. And by doing so, it gives it the gradients not so much like a straight gradient, but like the tones changing as they go down, or me trying to manipulate the overall look of the colors while I watch as they move down the face, you know. And I feel like I said, you know, like a million times on this recording, you know, yeah, doing lips are hard. Like this real rigid style that I use, trying to make soft things look soft with hard lines is very, very difficult. It's not something that I have locked down yet. Still working on it. Now we're filling in the eyes. The eyes are tricky too. You know, I don't know if you noticed, but I don't use solid whites. Well, at least I try not to use solid whites. I use them very sparingly, or solid blacks. All the line work you see is a very dark blue, because I don't know. I just feel like there's kind of I get no joy out of using those colors, and especially when you use solid white, it's hard to blend that into things, and it becomes so dominant in a piece that it draws all the attention to it, and everything else in the piece starts to lose its stance. And so now what I'm doing is adding what we call ambient light. Since the background is this bright magenta color, it will, when light hits, is shown in this area, it's going to create a magenta hue across everything in that vicinity. So to kind of maintain the fidelity of the lighting, you know, to create that feeling of believability that I've been discussing, is you add this layer on top of it so that it tints all the color to be within this spectrum. So, but I don't want it to be overpowering. So what I do is I set it to color, and then I bring down the opacity some, so it's not completely one thing, but it does have a tone to it. And you can see the difference between light and dark in the illustration. I mean, not light and dark. You can see the tint take effect within the colors of her skin, and in the lighting, they all have like a slight tint of magenta to it at this point. Hey, I hope that video was helpful. That was just a short little breakdown of the things that go through my mind while I'm trying to create these lighting effects, and I hope the techniques that I shared and the insights have helped you in some way. If you have further questions about how you can implement these type of techniques into your work, I'd love to hear more. You can find me on Instagram at @PoPhoenix, and on Twitter that's the same thing. I'm always around, I'm helpful. I always tell people I'm a resource, and any information that I may possess, I give away freely, because it makes no sense to maintain and hold information that actually loses power the longer you hold on to it. So I give it away freely. So with that said, be kind to yourself and have a good day. Peace.